Hey guys, welcome back, chillers.
Hey, hey.
If you didn't know, I'm Alex,
And I'm Amber.
and this is another episode of True Crime and Chill. So we are rolling into Thanksgiving this week, turkey, and the election battle apparently rages on.
Yes, and due to it all, despite being on the brink of the holidays, the world seems to be filled with so much hate.
It really does feel like that, especially on the internet because nobody has anything to do.
Oh, trolls abound. Meanwhile, there was someone we mentioned a couple of episodes back that really had me thinking about some of the stuff that's somewhat relatable.
Okay, now I'm lost.
Okay, well, I read something from a psychiatrist that cults and churches and, sadly, politics grow their numbers not by canvassing.
I mean, I don't know. Pretty sure one of those people at my doorstep might convert me someday.
It may surprise you to find out then that that's actually how they keep their followers loyal. It's not about bringing people in, it's about keeping others out.
Are we getting political? Because we promised we wouldn't get political.
No, actually, we're getting a little psychological. See, we grow closer with others when our same beliefs that we constantly believe in are bombarded by others with opposing beliefs. It makes us bond at higher levels.
So you're saying if I shut the door in the face of someone trying to get me to vote for their candidate or discuss their religion,
it actually brings them closer together as a group. And I'll admit we're seeing a lot of it these days.
I mean, yeah, we're all looking for love and acceptance, but have you noticed how when all this started, we were all playing this cute little game of everybody owning an island, and now we're playing a game where everybody just wants to kill each other?
Yeah. Well, and in those same lines, no one joins a cult to join a cult. They join a group of people to love and accept them. However, sometimes that results in their untimely demise, and unfortunately, that's one of the things that caused over 900 deaths in Jonestown, Guyana.
And about 3 of those were children. Yeah. Great parenting.
Right. So this week we'll be discussing Jim Jones and the People's Temple in Jonestown, Guyana. But before we get into it, let's get to the disclaimer.
My favorite. Right. We are not psychologists, professionals, cops, FBI investigators, CIA, BAU, criminologists, blood spatter analysts, or anything of the above. We're simply fans of true crime, just like you.
Absolutely. And we do our best each week to bring you interesting and sometimes dark cases from the past and sometimes present for your information, consideration, and education.
And we also do our best to research and bring you the most accurate information that we can.
But sadly, we're human. Sometimes we get it wrong. However, you can always see our case notes, credits, and other information on our website, truecrimeandchill.com.
Also, if we offend you or you find us unbearable to listen to, please move along. There are plenty of other podcasts out there. You don't need to go and leave negative reviews just because you don't agree with something we say.
Yeah. However, if you do like what you hear, please drop us a review on your preferred podcast listening site and let us know what you like so we can keep it up.
That being said, let's go.
All right. Our story begins in a small town in Indiana from 1931 to 1965. It's where Jim Jones grew up. Jim stated that he grew up poor and on the wrong side of the tracks. His father was a drunk and didn't work. His mother had to work to bring in all the income into the family, and his family, by all rights of the term, was dysfunctional. People that knew Jim Jones as a child admit that he was a little weird, saying there was something not quite right. He was obsessed with religion and death. During playtime, he would conduct funerals for small animals that had died, and there were reports of him also harming the animals in order to conduct the funerals.
What?
Yeah. As he grew up, he looked for a community, and he ended up finding it within the Pentecostal church. He began to train as a preacher, and as he trained, it became very clear that he could get a following. In his following, he promoted mixing the races, which in the 1950s was not a very popular idea. He even had a rainbow family of his own with 3 adopted children, an African American and 2 Asian Americans, and 1 birth child of his own. That was incredibly unheard of at the time.
So while that doesn't sound like a bad thing, the Pentecostal part does kind of strike me. I did grow up in a Pentecostal church until I was about 13, and I ended up going to my Baptist church, and I very vividly remember being told I was going to go to hell for reading Harry Potter book at 8 years old. So
right.
That was really fun.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely have very strong beliefs in things. So really, while him him having a mixed family wasn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
People to this day admit that Jim Jones was working to break new ground against racism when that was just not a thing you did back then. And for it, he was actually quite hated and despised. He had been preaching in Indiana and decided he wanted out of Indianapolis and its racism. So he moved to California, which was, at the time, and still is, perceived as a progressive state. He brought people from his original congregation to Indiana.
Like he moved them over there?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, let me tell you a story to let you know a little bit of how Jim Jones worked. There was an account from a documentary that was aired on the BBC, and a man told the story of how his wife was a member of Jim Jones's flock, and she wanted to follow Jones to California. He told her if she wanted to follow him, she must be crazy. Jim Jones took the woman to a psychiatrist to get a clean bill of health as someone who was of sound mind. They presented it to the husband through a certified letter, and she left for California, and he never saw her again.
What?
Yeah.
Like, I'm so confused. Like, why? Why would somebody, like, I get it. We didn't really have a lot of rights back then. So technically, like, he could have just whisked her off. But, like, why would somebody willingly sign off on that and be like, yeah, go ahead and move to this state that you've never been to with this guy that you barely know?
It's about the love and acceptance, and that's what he was preaching.
How many people went with him?
A train of 15 cars took the trek with Jim Jones to move to California, this new world. And from 1965 to 1974 in Ukiah, California, Jim Jones created a religious movement called the People's Temple. Now, I want to go off my script here. As you all know, we follow a script. The reason he chose Ukiah is because there was a publication that came out that said it was one of like the 5 places in the world that could survive a nuclear disaster if it happened.
So he was essentially an end of the world prepper.
In a way. Yeah, he was. Many people described it as a paradise in the Redwood Valley with the grapevines and the greenery, and he basically created a compound for his followers. It was a socialist movement that appealed to people. The rich and the poor worked the same jobs side by side in order to help people. It was a religious movement based on civil rights and inclusiveness. It followed a part of the Bible where Jesus, in his early days, encouraged people to sell all of their things and have all things in common.
So, okay, so yeah, that does sound like something that would appeal to people today. I mean, people are very easily swayed anyway, so... But I don't remember him sticking only to California.
That's because he didn't. Jim Jones purchased Greyhound buses, and in the summer they would have a cross-country tour. The people were under the impression that it was to promote this socialist movement and to promote integration and to spread the word of the Lord. However, in retrospect, it was also to try to grow the population of the People's Temple. He asked the people at his services, and this is a quote, because I listened to lots of recordings, who else is saying, come and I'll give you a job, come and I'll give you a home, come and I'll give you a bed?
He honestly could have appealed to, like, a lot of the homeless people with that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. He encouraged people to join them on the buses where he would inevitably take them back to the compound in California, and he called it the Freedom Train. He started to appeal to an older generation, encouraging them to sell their homes and give the church the money in order to help with all the good things that he was doing.
Red flag number 1.
Oh, he provided senior citizens with essentially a retirement home for them. They had everything taken care of as long as they did as he asked and sold their houses and gave money from that and their life savings to the People's Temple. People all had a job within the People's Temple: elder care, filing, publication printing, farming. Some people both worked a full-time job and then came to work at the People's Temple. They would turn over their paychecks to the temple. They would get a $5 weekly allowance, but everything was taken care of for them. Medical, dental, clothing, you name it. It was taken care of for them. So the price of the lifestyle was worth it to them. And despite a large lack of sleep, in fact, they would often boast to each other how little they slept because they were so busy working. One woman said the longest she stayed awake was 6 days. Sleep was considered a luxury. And without sleep, people gave over their thoughts and let Jim Jones just do it for them. Taking care of each other was part of the appeal. And the other part was that he promoted no isms, no sexism, no racism, no rich, no poor.
Okay, so first off, you can really only stay alive for about 11 days with no sleep.
Yep.
Okay, that's 11 days.
Yeah.
Like staying awake safely, like adults like should never stay awake longer than 17 hours technically, but you start experiencing sleep deprivation effects after 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I know this for a fact because when I was in the military, I did a 24-hour shift and then went out and partied with my friends that night. I didn't drink, I was a sober driver, but as I was driving home, I got pulled over. And the cop was like, you have like all the signs of being drunk right now, but you're not. He's like, that's dangerous.
Yep.
So technically you could really only go about 11 hours without like having horrible things happen to your body. So the fact that they were going these 6-7 days without sleeping, it just kind of blows my mind right there. But at the same time, I see like where the appeal was, because there's a lot of compounds, I guess you can call them, out there in the United States and in other places in the world where this is literally what it is. They work together as a family. They're off the grid. They don't have electronics. Everybody pitches in, but they do it safely. It really seems like this guy was just trying to build up his numbers, but keeping them like sleep deprived enough to where they couldn't really make conscious thoughts of like, okay, you know what, maybe what this guy is doing isn't okay. Yeah. But like I do see like where the appeal of somebody else taking care of you comes in, but like the fact that he was like essentially like torturing them without them knowing.
Brainwashing.
Yeah, essentially brainwashing them without them knowing, so that way they couldn't put two and two together. That doesn't sound very appealing.
No. In fact, the fastest way to get people to just give up and let someone else handle things, including the thinking, is sleep deprivation. People say that the services for the People's Temple made them come alive. They had music, dancing, praise, spirit. They say that coming to a service at the People's Temple felt like a family, and it felt like coming home.
Okay, so I've seen pictures and video because we talked about this before, and I actually did a report on this in high school and stuff. So I've seen pictures and video and all this stuff or whatever. And I mean, it does kind of look like a service that you would actually want to go to. Like there was a lot going on at these things and everything, and it looked like a lot of fun. But at the same time, and I can totally see like where an outsider would like see it, be like, oh, I want to be a part of this. This is so much fun, you guys. Like, yay, and everything. But like, ugh.
That's exactly it. And he had a packed house every service. Black, white, straights, addicts, it didn't matter. They accepted everyone who wanted to be a part of it. And the former members of the People's Temple say that Jim Jones spoke what was in their hearts. He would speak that the government was not taking care of the people. There were too many poor people out there, including poor children, that they needed to take care of each other. And every person felt that they had a place in the temple and that they were special. It's how he brought in college kids looking for acceptance, older women of color, people from diverse backgrounds, again, addicts, you name it. Anyone who was looking for that role of acceptance in life found it at the People's Church. It gave them all something bigger than themselves to be involved in.
He seriously profiled these people and became everything that they wanted him to be. You know what this like really reminds me of? Like actually sitting down listening to it again. You know what this reminds me of? The mega churches.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about? Like, you know, when you flip on your TV channel and it's those guy, like it's that old guy or whatever and everything. And he's talking about how like this is what this reminds me of. And I'm not, okay. And before anybody comes at me, I'm not saying that religion is bad. It is not. I am a religious person. I go to church every Sunday. I help out. I'm a religious person, and I'm not saying it's bad, but the difference between like my pastor now and like my pastor back at home and like these guys is they help you with what you're going through as you're going through it. They don't profile you and convince you that they are this person that's helping you when in reality they're taking advantage of you. Like this, like people still talk about like how it felt to be part of the congregation, how it was so warmth and how it was filled with warmth and how he would smile at them and how like he would make them feel like they belonged and stuff. And it's like, this is like,
they still talk about those times with smiles on their faces because of how it made them feel.
It's like brainwashing. This is brainwashing.
It gets worse, actually. And I know I say that a lot. I think I need to make one of our shirts with that. It gets worse.
It gets worse. But wait, there's more.
Well, people also still talk about the healing sessions he would do, how amazing they were to see, only to find out later that they were staged. There's one in particular that they talked about in some of the documentaries I watched. where it was this woman in a wheelchair, and he called her out and he said, today you're gonna walk, and so she stood up, and she, with one shaky leg, really slowly took a step, and then, now use the other leg, and so then the other leg, and then pretty soon she's running up and down the aisles and people are praising God, and that's just the way it was. Later they found out that she was a secretary for Jim Jones.
Could you just like imagine this? Like, could you imagine like thinking that this guy had like the power? And do not get me wrong, okay? I'm going back to it. Like, do not get me wrong. There are tons of cases out there that have unexplainable like things where doctors are even like there will be a terminally ill patient and doctors will like check them and their cancer is completely gone. Like there's tons of cases out there about this. Like people who really look at you and be like, well, I don't believe that there's something out there. You don't have to believe that it's a God. Like you just have to believe that there's something out there with a higher power because there's evidence. Like I'm not saying that it's not true, but could you imagine going to one of these? But could you imagine going to one of these and being like, oh my God, that lady's walking and stuff, and then all of a sudden find out like years later after like half the temple is dead and like you're like one of the only living survivors that like, oh, this was all fake. Yep. Like, as funny as it is, though, like my heart actually does break for these people that survive because it's like this was something that like they had close to their heart. Like, could you imagine like the devastation?
So the issue was, though, like at first it really was about inclusiveness and God and everything else.
Yeah,
but over time, Jim Jones's message began to change. He started to more or less denounce the Bible itself, telling people that the only power that really existed was the power within themselves, that the only hope of glory was within them, that no one was coming out of the sky for them, and there was no heaven up there. They had to make heaven down here. And
he was one step away from literally saying, there is no God, I am God.
Well, and people began to adore Jim Jones like the embodiment of God in the flesh. Jim Jones preached that he was the only heterosexual on the planet, that all the women were lesbians and all the men were gay. Therefore, anyone who was showing any sort of interest in sex was just compensating, and it was selfishness. He took away from the message, he said it took away from the message, which was to help others. And of course, we all know Jim Jones was not celibate, but the only way people found out was when he would engage in sexual relations with them.
So he basically pretended to be celibate and not follow it himself.
Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah.
He was one step away from taking teenagers as wives.
Oh, yeah. Well, so he also used to keep them from speaking to one another. It caused people to think that they were the only ones who had any feelings of doubt about the way he was handling things and the things that he was preaching, right? One New Year's Eve, over 100 people were gathered from the church to celebrate. And Jim Jones told the people that he had some punch and it was going to be passed out to everyone there. And after everyone drank it, he told them that they had all just drank poison and they would all die together in the church as one. Some women were screaming and crying, concerned for their children. My babies, my babies. Others just sat there. Jones admitted then that they hadn't actually been poisoned, but it had been a test of loyalty. He believed followers should be willing to die for their cause, and Jones was obsessed with revolutionary suicide.
That is manipulation. Gaslighting.
Oh, that's
narcissist. Like I can't even. Like, oh my God. Like, okay, so those of you who know me know that I love Criminal Minds, and a lot of their cases are based off of like they take elements from different actual real life cases. And there was one that I watched that was about a cult, and like literally they did this in this he had everybody drink this juice and then go, well, it's laced with poison, and everybody who flipped out and like had a bad reaction, he let go because he's like, you guys obviously are not like loyal to us. And this is exactly what this dude is doing. Now I see like where they got the inspiration from it from.
Oh yeah.
But like this is exactly what this dude is doing. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, and at this time people did not like normal people normal people would like look at this and be like, okay, this is a little creepy, I'm out. But if you've been brainwashed into this, like, because this is what, 4 years into him doing this or whatever, probably. This is a few years into him doing this. If you've been with him since the beginning and stuff, and I bet you anything, some people left after that. But majority of them stayed. And it's just, I sit here and it's like.
It was unheard of to leave the congregation, though, honestly, because, and that's where a lot of that whole like separation where they weren't allowed to talk to one another. And he used to encourage traitors to come forward. Like, if you hear someone saying that they don't believe in this, you need to come tell me because they are a traitor of God and they're a traitor of the church and blah, that's what he did. He turned people against each other. while still bringing them together as a congregation. Like, it's
It's
surprisingly
insane.
brilliant,
It's
as
insane.
sad and sick as it is.
No, it is. It is brilliant, and that's why like a lot of the cult leaders, like and I'm not saying Mormons. I'm saying like the extreme Mormons, the ones that don't actually follow the Mormon religion. Because I have a ton of Mormon friends. I have a ton of Mormon friends that I love. But I'm talking about the ones who the guys are marrying 14, 15-year-old girls. I'm talking about the one where their leader is literally in jail for being a pedophile. And they're like still following his law. I'm talking about like the group where they had an A&E show called Escaping Polygamy. Like this is what these like it everybody I've heard people go, well, yeah, we have cults these days and stuff, but at least it's nowhere near the Jim Jones effect. And it's like, yes, it is. If you are allowing your child who is 14 years old to marry a grown 50-year-old man, you are brainwashed in a cult. He may not be killing you guys, but he is definitely ruining your lives.
Well, so like in high school, I had this friend. We did after school sport together. I don't want to get into a lot of details. But she once told me, like, because I said something about her being my friend, she goes, actually, I mean, you're nice, but we can't be friends. My church won't allow it. So, and to me, part of religion is the inclusiveness, and that was one thing that Jim Jones preached was inclusiveness. And loving your brother and so on and so forth. So having somebody tell me that they couldn't be my friend because of their shirt, that was the first time that had ever happened to me. And I was like,
but real religion is like, it's not about inclusiveness. It's about literally loving everybody. Like that is one of the reasons why I love the church that I go to right now, because my pastor will get up on the stage and be like, it's not about loving. He's like, the people in this room are not the people that you need to worry about and love. Like, obviously, love each other and be there for each other. But he's like, it's the people outside of these walls who have issues going on, who have those addictions, who have those family issues and stuff. Those are the people that you need to love. He's like, and like, that's one of the reasons why I like him so much, is because that's a huge thing about religion. A lot of people, religious extremists who take it to the thing, go like, they will like be perfectly fine in their own like little thing, and it's an inclusive thing. But if somebody from outside tries to join, they instantly like shove them off. Like, oh, you're a single mom, looks at you sideways.
Yep.
Oh, you're LGBTQ, looks at you sideways. And it's like, I sit here and I'm like, okay, are we not reading the same Bible? Like, are we not listening to the same gospel? Like, are we not?
No.
So that's what irritates the hell out of me with these things, is because it's like, I sit here and I'm like, how do people how do people look at this and think that this is okay?
It honestly gets like, there's a lot of things I didn't include in this, mostly for time reasons. But a lot of people start talking about how he would bring people up on stage that were doing things that the church didn't believe in, and they would physically harm them. They would go to work with welts. They would be knocked out and then splashed water and then continue to be beaten in front of the whole church while the whole church cheered. And that wasn't abnormal.
It's not.
So like, back to the story here.
Also, we will have all the links to all the documents, all the videos, extra stuff. Like this one will probably have some extra long links, just so that way you guys can kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. There's a lot. Because there's a lot. Also, disclaimer, because we're going to tell you about it later, but just make sure you're careful when you listen to some of the videos.
Yeah. So Jones moved the People's Temple to San Francisco from 1974 to 1977. He realized that he wasn't growing his following fast enough in Ukiah. So San Francisco was a hub for movement, especially with the feelings of hopelessness that was running through the country at the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, consider the assassinations of like JFK and Malcolm X at that time, like, which now that I think about it, it really wasn't all that long ago.
No, it really wasn't. I mean, we're talking 1970. This is 1974.
Like, that's insane to think that it wasn't really all that long ago that those people died. Like,
it made it really easy for Jim Jones to come with his preachings of socialism. He also welcomed people requesting the People's Temple to show up at rallies and movement protests. He would bring busloads of people to help picket for the causes. He helped keep the attitude alive of we could change the world.
That is a powerful emotion, and it makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't it? If nothing else, when I was researching about how he gained such a dedicated following, I learned that this feeling of help and change is incredibly powerful and worked so well in his favor. But he also started gaining political power. But in the same breath, he was turning his followers against the government, saying that the government was wiretapping, sending assassins, and against the movement he was standing for. The followers of the People's Temple say that in the 70s, Jim Jones began to get increasingly more paranoid, that he was preaching more and more that the government was watching, that it was always there, that they were out to get him, and they were going to destroy them all if they weren't vigilant. The San Francisco temple was set fire to and burned down, and it had to be completely rebuilt. And it proved to the people that, indeed, someone could be out to get them. So he started to use these fear tactics to bring his congregation closer together.
So he's the one who probably burnt down his own temple.
I could not find anything to prove or disprove this.
Because, I feel like, if he did, it's, stronger together when you feel like an outside force is trying to get you.
This also could have
we just talked about this in last week's case with Emma Walker. We just talked about this. He used fear tactics to get her to lean on him.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Because that's what he did. He pretends to be kidnapped. He says that somebody's after them. And then all of a sudden,
he's firing a gun outside her window to make her think that somebody's after her.
He literally... Wow. Oh my God. Okay.
Welcome to why I wanted to do this one this week. So Jim Jones preached that it was the church's duty to have a place of protection for the people. So in December of 1975, a group of 90 flew to Guyana to see a new community that Jim Jones had commissioned in the depths of the jungle, and they began to build it. He promoted this community as a new city where followers could move to. They could raise their children within the ideals of the People's Temple without being stifled or attacked by the U.S. government, without the oppression and racism of the United States.
And then the propaganda video started.
Oh, yeah. And it's really interesting, the tactics that he used, truthfully. I've been reading this book. I actually brought it so I could show you. It's called Influence by Robert Cialdini. And in it, he discusses that when people write down their declarations and intentions, they're less likely to stray from them. So by putting their declarations down, they couldn't be persuaded in another direction, even if they were given evidence of something different. So on camera, he had these people say that they loved it there and they never wanted to return to their original homes, and it helped keep them under that belief. The film footage strongly encouraged people to go and join them and others down there. They appeared happy. They were a family. They all said they didn't want to go home. I mean, who wouldn't want to go live in a place like that? A place that looked like freedom.
I mean, you know what else it sounds like? ISIS. Just without all the blood and gore and severed heads.
If you're presented paradise.
Oh my God. There is just so much to unpack with this whole entire case. So much to unpack. And it's
yeah. It goes it really does. Jones persuaded over 1,000 followers to move to this remote jungle in Guyana. Defectors of the church started to publicly denounce Jones and some of the things that he was doing to people in the church. An article was written, and 6 hours before it was published, Jones had heard some of the stuff that was in it, and he decided it was time to go. 6 hours before it hit the stands. And they all got on planes and left.
Huh, how convenient.
Right, yeah. So, from 1977 to 1978, Jim Jones ran the People's Temple from Jonestown in Guyana.
He literally named this place after him.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. The concept was to build a new order, a socialist utopia, and he called it Jonestown, and it was described as a paradise. But as the people that escaped to Jonestown discovered, it was not. Followers of the People's Temple were overworked, they were underfed, and soon followers began to realize that there may not be much of a future for Jonestown. Jim Jones continued to become increasingly paranoid, especially as family members of those who had defected to Jonestown pleaded and began letter writing campaigns to the government about their fears about their loved ones who had gone. In Jonestown, there were tapes that ran 24 hours a day of Jones with his propaganda, preaching about the right choice they made to Jonestown because of all the bad stuff that was happening in the United States.
So even while they were sleeping, they were literally listening. They were getting brainwashed.
While they were sleeping, while they were going to the bathroom, while they were eating, while they were working, 24 hours a day. In fact, it was the only information they were given about the outside world, up to and including choosing their own path and their own death, not letting the government take away their children because of the proper decision they made for them by bringing them to Jonestown. He said things were getting worse in the United States and they couldn't go back home. He said that the evil forces against them were going to travel to Guyana to destroy them. He told them on some occasion that he was sending someone out to them. This was a really interesting one. This kind of does that whole like separating them. He told them on occasion that he was sending someone out to them, someone they knew and someone they loved and trusted, and this person was going to tell them that they wanted to leave. And it was a loyalty test, and these people needed to be turned in.
So everyone was just turning on each other.
Yeah. Husbands and wives, parents and children. There was no ability to express wanting to leave. It's truthfully, again, an incredibly brilliant way to make sure no one who really wanted to leave could say anything and leave. It was forbidden.
He held them captive without like any type of weapon.
Yeah. He told them it was blasphemy.
Like he literally just held them, because it's like a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, well, like why didn't they just leave? And it's like, well, listen to this. Like
this is why
he literally held them captive. He literally convinced parents to feed their children cyanide laced Flavor Aid. Like he knew, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they knew it was laced with cyanide, correct? Yeah, they knew.
Oh, we'll get to that. We're going to get
like,
there.
I'm sorry, but like...
Let's talk about what led up to this event, okay?
Oh, my God.
In 1978, in November, a concerned and progressive Congressman, Leo Ryan, flew to Guyana to investigate, accompanied by NBC News. He wanted to see for himself exactly what was going on down there because so many families were concerned and writing him about their family that was down there. So in Jonestown, a lot of preparations were made for the congressman's visit, and some of the people who survived everything talked about the scenarios that Jim Jones created and presented to the people. Scenarios like they weren't going to let the people in, or they were going to let them in, but then they were going to kill them when they showed up. Aide to the congressman and future congresswoman Jackie Spearer reflects that she remembers being afraid of this visit, and she remembers having a copy of the congressman's will and had it placed in a special drawer in her desk just in case.
So, like, they were literally going to send this congressman.
He wanted
down
to go
there.
No, he was this really progressive congressman. Like, he went to prisons and spoke with prisoners and tried to help with like starting the reform processes and things like. He was very progressive and very forward thinking. And so his thought was, okay, well, let's, these people are really, really concerned for their family. So let's go look. Let's go see what's really going on down there, because they were all saying these people can't leave. We're not allowed to speak to them. Like, we're not hearing from them. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go down. I'm going to check it out. Right? Like,
which is understandable. Like,
I think it was a really, honestly, I mean, without looking hindsight 2020, it seems like a very smart decision to make, because then it sort of kind of eases both sides. Right? Because then he can say everything's great here, which appeases Jonestown and helps the family members feel secure, right? So they arrived and they began the tour. Sound technician Stephen Sung remembers arriving around 6 p.m. and seeing just beautiful signs welcoming them into Jonestown. Journalist Tim Retterman remembers it as impressive, and that is a direct quote. Because how could you not be impressed that in the middle of miles and miles of dense jungle was just this city, a community where people helped one another and praised the work they did all day long. Crops, houses, clinics, daycares. It was a functioning town. So November 17th of 1978 shows video that NBC crews took of the Jonestown people. Dancing, singing, praising, smiling. Jonestown put on a reception. And Spearer remembers it as being a vibrant community. Congressman Ryan gave a speech that said, "I came here to have a look around and see what was going on. And some of the comments I've heard from many of you say that this is the best thing that's ever happened to them." And just cheers for like minutes. Standing, ovation, cheering, excited. But meanwhile, there were people who wanted to ask for help. People who let it be known they wanted to mention to the congressman that they wanted help leaving. So a couple people passed secret notes to the cameramen that were going around the outside, right? So due to the sensitive nature of these notes being passed, it tipped off the congressman and the crew that something was wrong. NBC crews interviewed people, and while some followers praised Jonestown, others made it very clear they wanted to leave. So on November 18th, 1978, NBC crews did interview people, and they asked the people if they wanted to stay or go or why. And many, if not all that were interviewed, said they loved it. They were free to leave anytime they wanted to, but they didn't want to.
But obviously that wasn't true, considering they were getting notes past them saying,
right,
God help us. Like,
so that day, a big storm blew in. They talk about it just being dark and just like a monsoon. During the storm, some of the people came up and told them that they wanted to leave and that they were being held prisoner. They wanted the congressman and his people to take them with them. So there is camera footage from the congressman's aides speaking with a group of 3 people, confirming that on that day, November 18th, 1978, they wanted to leave Jonestown, and they all agreed. Jim Jones came to speak with these people. He told them, don't speak with the reporters. They're all liars. He told them that they could come back and visit their families they were leaving behind anytime they wanted to. You can come back and see your son anytime you want to. Jim Jones claimed on camera that the notes that were passed to NBC crew were lies, and they were from liars, and that people play games and they lie. And he begged the crew to just leave and leave them alone.
Sounds like he knew if these people left, he would get caught.
Sort of like how he left right before that article dropped.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So word got out that some of the people were leaving with the congressman and other visitors, and Spearer recalls that's when all hell broke loose. There's video of people screaming and crying, begging the visitors to bring their people back, to not let them, be separated from their babies. There were more people who wanted to leave, and Jim Jones began to tell people they couldn't leave because they were his people. And it was really clear that he was feeling very betrayed. The congressman was tipped off by a defecting Jonestown resident that he was in extreme danger and he needed to leave. The congressman assured him that he didn't have anything to worry about and he was under the protection of the congressman and the government.
Yeah. Sounds like he really didn't believe he was in any danger, but a smart person would be like, you know what?
Yeah. So in the pavilion, a resident approached the congressman with a knife and told him he was going to die. There was expletives involved. I didn't want to quote it exactly, but basically it was like, you're going to die, mother effer. Instead, the resident was stopped by a group of the congressman's people and defectors by jumping on him. Spearer remembers there being a random uproar, followed by the congressman walking away with his shirt bloodstained. Everyone piled into trucks to return to the airfield and to go back to the United States. When the congressman left, he took 15 defectors with him, which, of course, really upset Jones. And at the commune, Jones gathered his followers for a sermon. Meanwhile, as the congressman, his people, the NBC crew, and the defectors were boarding the plane, a dump truck approached them. 3 men got off the truck, holding guns. They looked around for a little bit, seemed to be sort of looking at the faces of people, didn't say anything, didn't do anything. They got back onto the truck, pulling up to the other side of the airplane, cutting everyone off from the jungle. And this is not hearsay. This happened because there is video and photos.
I really don't think Jones took into consideration that with a camera crew and journalists, everything is going to be recorded no matter what.
Or maybe he thought that if they all died, he could keep the footage and never let it be seen. Nonetheless, people popped up from the back of the dump truck and they opened fire on the airstrip. 5 people were killed, including the congressman and NBC correspondent Don Harris and cameraman Bob Brown. Sound engineer Steve Sung, field producer Robert Flick escaped alongside the congressman's aide and future congresswoman Jackie Spearer. Jackie's account was very, very terrifying. She remembered laying on the ground on her side, pretending to be dead, and they still came up and shot her point blank. Back at Jonestown, the people gathered for the sermon that Jim Jones had called them all to. A follower of the temple remembers it was quiet, somber, sad. Jim Jones announced that the congressman was dead, and people cheered. Jones reminded them that the congressman was not the last person who was going to try and come and disrupt their community. He warned people were coming to torture the children and the elderly. Jones told them, and this is a direct quote, "If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace." And people cheered. A member, Christine Miller spoke up. And I want to say all these recordings are available out there. If you want to go listen to them, you can. Jim Jones recorded every sermon that he did. Because
just
that's
beware,
the mindset
because
that he was.
just beware, because if
They are
you can't
dark.
handle it, don't listen to it.
They are
Don't
dark.
listen to it.
A member, Christine Miller, spoke up and said she didn't want to die there. She wondered why they put so much work into everything just to throw it away. And when she protested in favor of the children living, Jones said, more than deserving to live, they deserved peace. The crowd continued to ramp up enough to where she was eventually put down for police continuing to want to live. Members began to notice armed guards starting to surround the pavilion. Meanwhile, Jones continues his sermon.
Okay, and like we said, everything was recorded. So if you listen to this, it is extremely hard to listen to, because you're listening, because in one ear you're listening to this guy preach, and the other ear you're listening to like these kids crying and stuff. Because in reality, cyanide poisoning is not a quick thing. It's not like, oh, you pop a pill and go. No, it takes up to 30 minutes at like least, and everything. And what happens is literally you are suffocating from the inside. Like,
you start foaming at the mouth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you start foaming at the mouth. You're suffocating. All your organs get shut down. You are awake.
Yeah.
And feeling every single thing that's happening to you. So like, these parents willingly gave their kids cyanide. Yeah. Willingly. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, what?
So the recording, it's not hard to find, but it's very hard to listen to, because you hear children screaming and crying. And the longer he speaks, the quieter and quieter it gets in the background. Meanwhile, Jones is spouting more propaganda, like, let us not fall into the hands of the enemy. Hurry, my children. And we've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it. And die with a degree of dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. It's nothing to death. It's just stepping into another plane. Don't be this way. He served them Kool-Aid, or Flavor Aid, spiked with cyanide.
And if you don't know, this is literally where "don't drink the Kool-Aid" comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like,
he was trying to make it less bitter. Actually, it was overheard him talking to somebody, is there any way to make it taste less bitter? And he also asked, is it quick?
Nope.
Children and people started dying. People who were there and witnessed it said they would not describe it as suicide, but rather Jones killing them.
Yeah, it literally was.
Jones is recorded as saying, we didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world. One man recalls watching his wife holding their baby and poison being injected into his son's mouth. And his wife died in his arms. His baby died in his wife's arms. And sadly, that was a really common story of the very few who survived. Later autopsies showed that some had been forcibly given the cyanide through injections. A small group of 5 followers escaped in the confusion of that morning, hiking through more than 30 miles of dense jungle to safety. Another group of 80 survived as they were out of town at the capital of Georgetown on a public relations trip for the temple. 3 of Jim Jones's sons were away that day. Stephen Jones, Jim Jones's only birth son, wrote a series of essays that I will have linked on our page, truecrimeandchill.com. It is a very telling, like, he talks about going back after it all happened. He talks about what happened while he was in Georgetown and how they got a message that they were supposed to also kill themselves, which they did not. Today, a memorial in Oakland serves in remembrance of those who died. And the lesson of Jonestown is to go within so you don't have to go without. It's better to live for a cause than die for it. And as we said before, more than 900 died and 300 of them were children. Jones didn't take the cyanide. He died from a shot to the head.
I feel like if he thought he could get away with this and completely change his appearance and who he was and disappear for a few years and then come back, I feel like he would have tried to do it again. Like, I really do. I feel like he would have tried to do it again.
Yeah.
But he knew damn well, with all the video footage and all the evidence and everything, there was no way he would have been able to change himself so drastically to where people wouldn't recognize him. Yeah. So I really feel like if he didn't do this, he would have done it again. Like, cyanide is what they used to kill Jewish prisoners in Nazi Germany. That is what the showers were. And stuff. He's literally taking a page out of Hitler's book
fake media. Don't listen to the media. They're all liars. Da-da-da-da-da. Lugenpress.
Yep.
Cyanide.
Yep.
You
Gunshot
know,
to the head.
right. And the government isn't going to take care of you, but I will.
Exactly. Like, literally, he's taking a page out of Hitler's handbook. It's insane.
So the thing to me is that history repeats itself, right? And
Yep.
I mean, me as somebody who does marketing, right? I read books about marketing so I can learn from what these other people do that works. So
Yep.
Hitler, despite being Hitler, he had a method to his madness. He had a plan for his tyranny that worked. So it makes sense that he would then take a page from somebody who was successful at doing what he wanted to do so that he could copy it and do the same thing. That's not uncommon. History repeats itself. So in Jonestown, after everything, an anonymous letter was found from a follower who urged for the tapes and writings to be gathered and studied over and over so that this would never happen again, that they didn't want this kind of ending. It's easy to look back and say we wouldn't have been enamored by Jim Jones and his teachings, but perfectly sane people were easily drawn into his web of lies and deceit by his messages of acceptance and love.
Yep.
It can happen to anyone. So let's remember to study cases like this so this kind of thing never happens again.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, please visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesday.